Hi, welcome. My name is Monica G. Soria, and welcome to this video. This is Unit 4, and I will be discussing what is standardized testing. The rush to carry out standardized testing in every walk of life has not gone unchecked. Some psychometricians have stood up in recent years to caution the public against reading too much into tests that require what may be a narrow band of specialized intelligence. Organizations such as the National Center for Fair and Open Testing have reminded us that standardization of assessment procedures creates an illusion of validity. Strong claims from the giants of the testing industry, they say, have pulled the collective wool over the public's eyes and in the process have incorrectly marginalized thousands, if not millions, of children and adults worldwide. Whichever side is right, and both sides have legitimate cases, it is important for teachers to understand the educational institutions they are working in. And an integral part of virtually all of those institutions is the use of standardized tests. So, it is important for you, for us, to understand what standardized tests are, what they are not, how to interpret them, and how to put them into a balanced perspective. Okay, so this chapter has two goals. The first one is to introduce the process of constructing, validating, administering, and interpreting standardized tests of language, and to be acquainted with a variety of current standardized tests that claim to test overall language proficiency. So I guess it should be clear from these goals that in this chapter we are not focusing only on classroom-based assessments. Don't forget, however, that standardized tests affect all classrooms and some of the practical steps that are involved in creating standardized tests are directly transferable to designing classroom tests. So, what exactly is standardization? A standardized test presupposes certain standard objectives or criteria that are held constant across one form of the test to another. The criteria in large scale standardized tests are designed to apply to a broad band of competencies that are usually not exclusive to one particular curriculum. A good standardized test is the product of a thorough process of empirical research and development. It basically dictates standard procedures for administration and scoring. And finally, it is typical of a norm reference test, the goal of which is to place test takers on a continuum across a range of scores and to differentiate test takers by their relative ranking. For example, most elementary and secondary schools in the US have standardized achievement tests to measure children's mastery of the standards or competencies that have been prescribed for specified grade levels. These tests vary by states, counties, and school districts, but they all share the common objective of economical large scale assessment. There are also that college entrance exams such as the Scholastic Aptitude Test or SAT are part of the educational experience of many high school seniors seeking further education. There's also the Graduate Record Exam or GRE, in which it is a required standardized test for entry into many graduate school programs. So many people are under the incorrect impression that all standardized tests consist of items that have predetermined responses presented in a multiple choice format, right? While it is true that many standardized tests conform to a multiple choice format, by no means is a multiple choice a prerequisite characteristics. It so happens that a multiple choice format provides the test producer with an objective. So there are steps that we should follow in developing a good standardized test. But with this, there are three different standardized tests that will be used to exemplify The process of a standardized test design. The first one is the test of English as a foreign language. We all know that as TOEFL. It is from the Educational Testing Service, or ETS. Next, we have the English as a Second Language Placement Test, or ESLPT. That is from San Francisco State University. Then lastly, the Graduate Essay Test, or the GET, also from the SFSU. So we can observe from the three, specifically the first one is a test of general language ability or proficiency. The second is a placement test at a university, and the third is a gatekeeping essay test that all prospective students must pass in order to take graduate level courses. As we look at the steps one by one, we will see patterns that are consistent with those outlined in the previous two chapters for evaluating and developing a classroom test. The first step in developing a standardized test is number one, to determine the purpose and objectives of the test. So, most standardized tests are expected to provide high practicality in administration and scoring without unduly compromising validity. The initial outlay of time and money for such a test is significant, but the test would be used repeatedly. It is therefore important for its purpose and objectives to be stated specifically. So, for example, the purpose of the TOEFL is to evaluate the English proficiency of people whose native language is not English. So, more specifically, the TOEFL is designed to help institutions of higher learning make valid decisions concerning English language proficiency in terms of their own requirements. Most colleges and universities in the US use TOEFL scores to admit or refuse international applicants for admission. There are various cutoff scores applied, but most institutions require scores from 475 to 525. This is paper-based, or from 150 to 195 for the computer-based, in order to consider students for admission. The high stakes, gatekeeping nature of the TOEFL is quite obvious. The second step in developing a good standardized test is design test specifications. Now, here comes the hard part. Decisions need to be made on how to go about structuring the specification of the test. Before specs can be addressed, um, a comprehensive program of research must identify a set of constructs underlying the test itself. This stage of laying the foundation stones can occupy weeks, months, or even years of effort. Because the TOEFL is a proficiency test, the first step in the developmental process is to define the construct of language proficiency. First, it should be made clear that many assessment specialists, such as Bachman and Palmer, prefer the term ability to proficiency and thus speak of language ability as the overarching concept. The latter phrase is more consistent, they argue, with our understanding that the specific components of language ability must be assessed separately. Others, such as the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages, still prefer the term proficiency because it connotes more of a holistic, unitary trait view of language ability. So, most current views accept the ability argument and therefore strive to specify and assess the many components of language. So, for the purpose of consistency in this chapter, the term proficiency will nevertheless be retained. So, again, how we view language will make a difference in how we assess language proficiency. After breaking language competence down into subsets of listening, speaking, reading, and writing, each performance mode can be examined on a continuum of linguistic units, which are phonology for pronunciation and orthography for spelling, words, lexicon, sentences for grammar, discourse and pragmatic for the social linguistic, contextual functional cultural features of language. The third step in developing a standardized test is design, select, and arrange test tasks or items. Once the specifications for a standardized test have been stipulated, the sometimes never ending task of designing, selecting, and arranging items begins. The specs act much like a blueprint in determining the number and types of items to be created. For example, in TOEFL, items are then designed by a team who select and adapt items solicited from a bank of items that have been deposited by freelance writers and ETS staff. Probes for the reading section, for example, are usually excerpts from authentic general or academic reading that are edited for linguistic difficulty, culture bias, or other topic biases. So these items are designed to test overall comprehension, certain specific information, and inference. So let's take a look at the reading selection and the following 10 items. As you can see, the items target the assessment of comprehension of the main idea. The item number 11 stated details on the number 17, 19, unstated details for the number 12, 15, 18, implied details for number 14, 20, and vocabulary in context for number 13, 16. An argument could be made about the cultural schemata implied in a passage about pirate ships, and you could engage in an angels on the head of a pin argument about the importance of picking certain vocabulary for emphasis. But every test item is a sample of a larger domain, and each of these fulfills its designated specification. Before any such items are released into a form of the TOEFL or any validated standardized test, they are piloted and scientifically selected to meet difficulty specifications within each subsection, section, and test overall. Furthermore, those items are also selected to meet a desired discrimination index. Both of those or these indices are important considerations in the design of a computer adaptive test, where performance on one item determines the next one to be presented to the test taker. The next step, make appropriate evaluations of different kinds of items. So in chapter 3, the concepts of item facility, item discrimination, and distractor analysis were introduced. As the discussion there showed, such calculations provide useful information for classroom tests, but sometimes the time and effort involved in performing them may not be practical, especially if the classroom-based test is one-time test. Yet, for a standardized multiple choice test that is designed to be marketed commercially and or administered a number of times and or administered in a different form, these indices are a must. For other types of response formats, namely production responses, different forms of evaluation become important. So, the principles of practicality and reliability are prominent along with the concept of facility. So, practicality issues in such items include the clarity of directions, timing of the test, ease of administration, and how much time is required to to score responses. Reliability is a major player in instances where more than one scorer is employed, and to a lesser extent when a single scorer has to evaluate tests over long spans of time that could lead to deterioration of standards. And then facility is also a key to the validity and success of an item type, like unclear directions, complex language, obscure topics, fuzzy data, and culturally biased information may all lead to a higher level of difficulty than one desires. So, for example, in the case of the open-ended responses on the two written tasks on the ESLPT, a similar set of judgments must be made. Some evaluative impressions of the effectiveness of prompts and passages are gained from informal student and scorer feedback. So, in the developmental stage of the newly revised ESLPT, both types of feedback were formally solicited through questionnaires and interviews. That information proved to be invaluable in the revision of prompts and stimulus reading passages. After each administration now, the teacher scorers provide informal feedback on their perceptions of the effectiveness and the prompts and readings. So the multiple choice editing passage showed the value of statistical findings in determining the usefulness of items and pointing administrators toward revisions. So let's try reading the multiple choice editing passage. So the task was to locate the error in each sentence. Statistical tests on the experimental version of this section revealed that a number of the 45 items were found to be of 0 IF, no difficulty whatsoever, and of inconsequential discrimination power, some IDs of 0.15 and lower. Many distractors were of no consequence because they lured no one. Such information led to a revision of numerous items and their options, eventually strengthening the effectiveness of this section. All right, moving on to the next step, we have specify scoring procedures and reporting formats. A systematic assembly of test items in pre-selected arrangements and sequences, all of which are validated to conform to an expected difficulty level, should yield a test that can then be scored accurately and reported back to test takers and institutions efficiently. So I have here an example of a TOEFL score report. TOEFL scaled scores for Claudia Y. Estudiante from Peru. Her listening is 19, structure or writing 17, reading 17. Total score is 177, essay writing that is 3.0. So the rating scale for the essay is virtually the same one that is used for the test of written English, with a 0 level added for no response, copying the topic only, writing completely off topic, or not writing in English. Okay, let's proceed to the sixth step, which is perform ongoing construct validation studies. So from the previous discussion, it should be clear that no standardized instrument is expected to be used repeatedly without a rigorous program of ongoing construct validation. So any standardized test, once developed, must be accompanied by systematic periodic corroboration of its effectiveness and by steps toward its improvement. So this rigor is especially true of tests that are produced in equated forms. That is, forms must be reliable across tests such that a score on a subsequent form of a test has the same validity and interpretability as its original. So, for example, the TOEFL program, in cooperation with other tests produced by ETS, has an impressive program of research. Over the years, dozens of TOEFL sponsored research studies have appeared in the TOEFL monograph series. It is an early example of such a study was the seminal Duran et al. 1985 study, TOEFL from a communicative viewpoint on language proficiency, which examined the content characteristics of the TOEFL from a communicative perspective based on current research in applied linguistics and language proficiency assessment. So again, those are the steps in developing the standardized test. Number one, determine the purpose and objectives of the test. Number two, design test specifications. Number three, design, select, and arrange the items or tasks. Number four, make appropriate evaluation of different kinds of evaluations. Number five, specify scoring procedures and reporting formats. And last but not the least, number six, perform ongoing construct validation studies. At this point, we have the standardized language proficiency testing. Tests of language proficiency presuppose a comprehensive definition of the specific competencies that comprise overall language ability. The specifications for the TOEFL provided an illustration of an operational definition of ability for assessment purposes. This is not the only way to conceptualize the concept. So, according to Swain, he offered a multidimensional view of proficiency assessment by referring to three linguistic traits, that is, grammar, discourse, and social linguistic, that can be assessed by means of oral, multiple choice, and written responses. So, Swain's conception was not meant to be an exhaustive analysis of ability, but rather to serve as an operational framework for constructing proficiency assessments. Then, another definition and conceptualization of proficiency is suggested by the ACTFL Association, which was mentioned earlier. According to them, it takes a holistic and more unitary view of proficiency in describing four levels, that is, superior, advanced, intermediate, and novice. Within each level, descriptions of listening, speaking, reading, and writing are provided as guidelines for assessment. I'd also like to emphasize the four standardized language proficiency tests. We now turn to some of the better known standardized tests of overall language ability or proficiency to examine some of the typical formats used in commercially available tests. We will not look at standardized tests of other specific skills here, but that should not lead you to think by any means that proficiency is the only kind of test in the field that is standardized. Again, there are four commercially produced standardized tests of English language proficiency. The first one is the TOEFL. Next, the Michigan English Language Assessment Battery. Then, the International English Language Testing System, IELTS. And last, the test of English for International Communication. I have also injected in here some of the questions that might be helpful in evaluating those aforementioned tests and their subsections. So the first one is what item tests are included. Number two, how practical and reliable does each subsection of each test appear to be? Number three, do the item types and tasks appropriately represent a conceptualization of language proficiency or ability? That is, can we evaluate their construct validity? Then, do the tasks achieve face validity? Number five, are the tasks authentic? Number six, is there some washback potential in the task? I have here an image of the Michigan English Language Assessment Battery or MILAB. It actually includes the producer, the objectives, the primary market, the types, the response modes, the time allocation, and internet access. It also includes the specifications and the comment. All right, so we have reached the last part of the unit. So what should we remember in developing the standardized test? The construction of a valid and standardized test is no minor accomplishment, absolutely. Whether the instrument is large or small scale, the designing of specifications alone, as this unit illustrates, requires a sophisticated process of construct validation coupled with considerations of practicality. Then, the construction of items and scoring or interpretation procedures may require a lengthy period of trial and error with prototypes of the final form of the test, with painstaking attention to all the details of construction. The end product can result in a cost effective, time saving, accurate instrument. Our use of the results of such assessment can provide useful data on learners' language abilities. But your caution is warranted as well for all the reasons discussed in this chapter. Then we have the references. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This is Monica signing out.